Gentrification is the movement of more affluent people with opportunity into a neighborhood or community that already exists. In that movement, those people who were originally there pushed out and replaced by people who are affluent with money. The communities end up being renovated because now there's money in the communities, but the people who actually need the renovations don't receive that.
Gentrification is designed to bring more money into neighborhoods, fueling growth and development of houses, businesses, and schools. The quality of housing improves due to renovations designed to modernize a particular area. With more residents moving in, new businesses open and provide people with better jobs. In addition, more people paying higher taxes means more funding for schools and other public organizations. Other benefits include lowered crime rates and cultural variation. People want to live in the center of the city because that is where a majority of jobs are located. The demand for housing in prime locations drives up prices, forcing lower-income residents to expand outward into areas they can afford to live in. For higher-income residents, the relatively cheap pricing combined with transportation of metro and buses draws more people in. A pattern develops, showing the further you get from the center, the lower the prices get, which is why the original residents are forced out to the edge of the city.
What's happening is they're moving to neighborhoods that are even more isolated, where there's even higher levels of segregation. Instead of going to areas where low income and people of color were underrepresented, they're being pushed into areas where they were already overly represented. If you were to just put your African American population on a map and then draw a line to try to see where the dividing line is, and if you do that, you'll see that to the east it's mostly black, and to the west, especially once you get into the suburbs, it's just all white, less than 20% African American. So if you do one of those maps for the year 2000, that dividing line is 16th Street Northwest. But if you look today, it's North Capitol. And if the trend continues, I could see, looking at a 2020 census map, I would not be surprised if you could draw that same line down, essentially the line where the river is.
In order for new residents to move in, previous residents must be pushed out.
It is a question of, properties go up, the taxes go up, how long can my neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. White, stay, right? That becomes the struggle of it all.
These previous homeowners happen to be of lower income than these new occupants moving in. Landlords and developers use their power to push the poor residents out. As the housing prices increase in a neighborhood, these poor residents just cannot afford to live there anymore.
I was fortunate enough to get an exemption, but it was just by the skin of my teeth. Because when my building went condo, I could have easily been one of those people who've been forced out to move to Maryland or Virginia.
These factors all point towards the idea that home developers use gentrification to target poor people so that they can maximize profits.
The city has been spending a record amount on affordable housing in recent years, but it's still the case that the number of households that need affordable housing in the city, the number of households that are potentially going to have to move outside the city because they can't afford to live here anymore, that need far outstrips the amount of resources that the city is currently putting into making housing affordable, especially for the lowest income families. At the same time, as the city is doing these investments, only a small share of them are actually creating housing affordable to the people who are most likely to be displaced by gentrification. So people who are, say, earning the minimum wage, or people who are seniors or who have disabilities and have been living in the district for a long time but are on fixed incomes. Our housing investments need to do a better job of creating housing that's affordable specifically for our lowest income residents, because those are the residents who really feel the pain of gentrification most acutely.
People who are working in development for the renovated and new housing within these communities don't really have any kind of affiliation or knowledge of the lifestyle within the communities. They just know it for the land value and how much it will cost and how much it can make them. So they're not thinking of the people who live there as these are human beings with lives and families who are affected by these decisions. They're looking at it as profit and money. I think in that the developers and the people who have the money to fund these projects not having any affiliation or knowledge of the people in the communities definitely plays a huge role into going into the communities and displacing those people.
The poor are being targeted due to them being vulnerable. They lack the resources to be able to fight back against the developers that work together to raise the costs of housing in these gentrified neighborhoods.
Also, in gentrifying neighborhoods, the police can sometimes be a factor. A lot of times when you have, new, white, high-income residents, move into a neighborhood, they'll start, calling the police, or maybe the police will just take it upon themselves to be more aggressive, with the folks that maybe it's a high school or a college kid walking down the street, it gets stopped and frisked, or maybe other forms of police harassment that operate sort of like the leaky roof that never gets fixed. Eventually it just sort of wears on people and they end up moving.
These landlords bully the poor homeowners out of their current residences by not sustaining their buildings and renewing their leases.
Sometimes you run into the issue of there just not being enough lawyers to help tenants exercise their rights where they don't have the money to hire a lawyer. Sometimes, when you talk about the criminal justice system, it sometimes feels like, people who have money can get out of going to prison, and people who don't can't. And the civil system works like that too, to a certain extent.
The developers then turn to the government to allow them to begin the process of gentrification for an area whose buildings are not being properly maintained. The government also believes that as long as they are pushing out the poor, the poverty statistics will improve because it no longer affects the district. These selfish motives utilized by the landlords drive the poor people out, and there should be new rules and regulations to stop this from happening. It has been established that the main effect of gentrification on the poor is that they are getting pushed away from the center of DC.
I remember coming to Howard to visit when I was a senior in high school, and we were told, my mom went here as well, and she always used to say the neighborhood's not that good around Howard, et cetera, et cetera. And when I got here, I heard the same thing, but over time, from then to now, Shaw is a completely different place with completely different faces. It costs a lot more to live here. There are a lot more resources, and if you have money, you can take advantage of that. But if you don't, then you get pushed out because it costs too much.
It's hard because I want to live where I can afford to live, but I don't want my neighbors to no longer have their home.
Some areas they must move to include Anacostia and even as far as Prince George's County. Not only does this affect them because they have to move, but their commute becomes much more daunting. They are also pushed out of communities that they have been a part of for the majority of their lives.
People moving in the neighborhood, not getting to know their neighbors, just isolating themselves, going to work, coming to work, staying in, only socializing with people that they feel more comfortable with. They don't really understand DC. They're just here to grab up, property so that they can commute to their jobs out in Virginia or Maryland.
There are people who've lived in a community for decades and decades, and their parents lived in the community, and their parents lived in the community. And for you to be pushed out of your home because of the value in property rising, and that you have no control over that, I don't think it's necessarily fair.
Gentrification gives dilapidated neighborhoods the chance to thrive. It brings new faces, new businesses, and most importantly, new resources into the communities. But this renovation comes at a cost. The poor are displaced from their houses, their businesses are replaced, and the home they have known for years is gone. They don't even reap the benefits from the new and improved DC that they gave up so much for. They are pushed east of the river and into the suburbs, which have their own set of problems. In spite of these consequences, selfish developers keep gentrifying neighborhoods because the property values trump the value of the people who live there.